Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for P6 Advanced Taxation on the area of badges of trade. Now, you may remember from our studies that we have a mnemonic that covers this area, SOFIRM, SOFIRM, and I'll take you through that in a moment. And that really covers these 6 factors. Okay, so why is this an important area in tax? Well, historically, the capital gains tax rates have been lower than the income tax rates. And as a result of that, it may well be that you find an individual who is trying to suggest to the revenue that they are simply selling some assets as opposed to selling items on a regular, frequent basis, and therefore subject to the income tax rules. Over and above that, and perhaps more commonly, you may well find that an individual is trying to suggest to the revenue that they're simply carrying on a hobby and that they shouldn't be subject to income tax or indeed any tax. So really these badges of trade, what they do is they enable us to have really a set of criteria, a set of factors that we can look at when we're trying to establish whether or not someone should be subject to income tax, let's say. Okay. Now, in this particular case, this question, number 11 in your BPP kits, is on page 9. Fairly straightforward question, but it gives us a good intro to this area. And you'll see down the left-hand side here that what they've done is listed those factors. Now, I draw your attention to the fact that if this were in play in sort of real life, what the revenue would do is that they would look at the balance of probabilities. Okay, so that's one thing that you should perhaps mention within your answers if this type of area comes up. You know, they look at the balance of probabilities, and no one factor would be conclusive. So they look at each of these factors under that heading of SOFIRM and really trying to get a feel for whether or not the individual should be subject to, let's say, income tax rather than CGT, or indeed subject to tax at all because perhaps the revenue feel that they are in fact in business in some way. Okay, so in this particular case we have an individual, Lorna, who's selling jewelry to her friends and other people, and what they do within the answer here is just run down each of the factors, the ownership period, the number of transactions, etc., and really assess based on the scenario given whether or not the factors are in play or not. Many of them are, but 1 or 2 of them aren't. Okay, so if we just take a few of those factors, the first one being jewelry itself. So that's really the subject matter, and this is obviously a commodity of some kind, and more often than not you find that commodities are, as they say, the subject of a trade. So that really lends itself towards someone carrying on a trade. Okay, and therefore subject to income tax. In relation to the ownership or the ownership period, it looks as if she sort of makes them and sells them within a short period. Yeah, so really that holding period, the shorter the holding period, sort of again lend itself towards someone who's perhaps carrying on a trade, making items, selling them quickly. If the ownership period was longer, perhaps that would work the other way. Okay, in terms of the frequency, so that's really linked into point number 2 here. The number of transactions, she's repeatedly making transactions and selling them at frequent intervals. Again, that lends itself towards someone who's carrying on a trade. Supplementary work in this case is sort of not overly relevant, as they pointed out here. Do remember that within these answers, assuming that you can remember the whole mnemonic, do say whether or not the factor is not in play. Don't just go the sort of the positive way, as it were. She's short ownership period, therefore, excuse me. Therefore, that lends itself towards a trade. Look at the other factors as well. Circumstances of sale, again, pretty straightforward. It's really, is she forced to sell them? Is it an emergency or is it an opportunity? In this case, it's an opportunity. So that lends itself towards someone who's perhaps carrying on a trade. And in terms of motive, really, we're talking about a profit motive here. Now, as we had raised in the revision class, more often than not, people are trying to make a profit, even if it's a hobby. So it may well be that that factor is not sort of overly strong. Okay, in this case it looks as if she's trying to make money, she's trying to make a profit, but that doesn't in itself necessarily lend itself towards someone carrying on a trade. So it looks as if in Lorna's case, she's selling jewelry. It looks as if most of the factors are sort of pointing towards her carrying on a trade, and therefore she's going to be subject, I suspect, to income tax. And you'll see in part B of this question, they've clearly come down on the line of she's making and selling commodities. Therefore, given the balance of sort of factors above, it looks as if she is carrying on a trade, so she should be deemed to be trading as such. And then here just a little bit of sort of info in relation to what's going to happen, in other words, how her income will be subject to tax. Okay, so hopefully that is good enough in terms of giving a little bit of background on this area. This is a pretty soft area, and certainly if it comes up in the exam, we should be trying to score some very, very good marks. So just remember that mnemonic, go back to your text if you need to. SOFIRM is what you need to remember, and just apply it to the circumstances of the case. Okay, thanks very much.